So in this video, I have a very important update in a major case against a statewide ban on the possession of magazines that hold more than 10 rounds, and also the mandatory permit that the state put in place. So let's break down what is happening. Now, before we jump into the video, I just want to mention that if you guys support this type of content, if you like this video, please consider subscribing. That really does help the channel to grow. Also, just double check to make sure YouTube has not unsubscribed you, because they do that quite often to a lot of people. And also just drop a positive comment down below, because that helps to tell the algorithm that you appreciate this type of 2A content and it should share to more people. As I mentioned in the intro, in this video, we're going to be discussing a challenge against a state magazine ban and a permit to purchase firearms. Oregon Measure 114 put in place a statewide permit to purchase and then also a magazine ban, but all of those were ruled unconstitutional and struck down in their entirety by a state court judge. The state court judge in this case issued a permanent injunction against Measure 114. Now, the state of Oregon, in response to that, attempted to remove the permanent injunction that was issued by the lower court. And they tried to do that through the appeals process, and they brought this case in front of the Oregon State Court of Appeals. Well, recently the Oregon Court of Appeals issued a unanimous order upholding the magazine ban and also the permit to purchase. That decision went against the permanent injunction, but this case is far from over. Now the plaintiffs in this case have filed for Supreme Court review in the state of Oregon. This now sets up a very critical battle to essentially keep Measure 114 permanently struck down and that permanent injunction in place against this law. Now, the case we're going to be discussing in this video is called Arnold versus Kotek. This is a case, again, which challenges Measure 114 as a violation of the Oregon State Constitution. Measure 114 first requires that anyone purchasing a firearm must obtain a permit to purchase. The second significant thing that this measure does is it will ban the sale, purchase, transfer, and possession of any magazines that hold more than 10 rounds after the effective date of the measure. So they grandfather in some of the magazines, but after it goes into effect, any new magazines are going to be outright banned. Now, in response to Measure 114, this Arnold case was filed in a state court. So this is a state court challenge, not a federal court challenge. Now, on review, Judge Robert Rocchio ruled in this case that Oregon Measure 114 was invalid under the state's constitution and must be struck down in its entirety with a permanent injunction. But of course, the story does not end there. The state of Oregon then appealed that decision up to the State Court of Appeals. Now, it's important to note that since this is a state court challenge under the Oregon State Constitution, there is a different standard for a state court to determine the constitutionality of this type of measure and whether or not it violates the state constitution. Under the standard in Oregon, Oregon applies a two-phase test. Under phase 1, there is a determination whether Article 1, Section 27 of the state constitution even applies. Under the first phase, Oregon argues that Article 1, Section 27 did not apply since they believe that these magazines are not arms and they are not protected items. The plaintiffs, of course, argue in contrast that that is incorrect. These are arms and they are protected by the Oregon State Constitution, and they're a type of arms and instruments that facilitate armed self-defense. Now, the second phase of the test is almost looking at the public's interest in balancing those claims and the claimed purpose against the undue burden or what impact it would have on the constitutional right in the state of Oregon. Of course, Oregon in the Measure 114 argues that the measure is in the public's best interest because it's aimed to stop crime and violent incidents. However, the trial court found through expert testimony and data that was produced at the trial court level that the public harms were kind of overblown and that the measure does not meet any of the claimed interest. It would not stop any of those claimed harms. Now, once this made its way to the Oregon Court of Appeals and after they heard oral arguments, my prediction after listening to those was that the Court of Appeals here wanted to reverse the lower court's decision. I stated after those hearings that I thought that they might try to kind of take the easy escape valve, easy way out in this case, and maybe try to use one of the new favorite, ways out of this, which is to say that this is a facial challenge. It's a facial challenge against the measure and against the constitutionality of it, and maybe it's constitutional in some application, and therefore the facial challenge fails. Well, that's exactly what the unanimous Court of Appeals did here in the state of Oregon. They held that all of ballot Measure 114 is facially valid under Article 1, Section 27 because the law is capable of some constitutional applications. In the opinion, the Court of Appeals stated that from the foregoing, the question we must address in this case is whether the enacting body, here the people of Oregon, enacted a reasonable regulation governing the possession and use of constitutionally protected arms in order to promote public safety without unduly frustrating the right to armed self-defense. In making that determination, we are addressing legal questions of the enacting body's purpose and the reasonableness of the regulation to achieve that purpose, i.e., whether the regulation is directed at and drafted to achieve the public safety purpose. If, as a legal matter, the measure is a reasonable regulation to promote public safety, there is one remaining legal question. Is the right to armed self-defense unduly frustrated? But despite all of that, essentially what the Oregon State Court of Appeals did is they said that it really didn't matter what the facts show. It doesn't matter the kind of constitutional limitations. Really, all that matters is the claimed public interest, the claimed threat, and what benefit this would have to the public interest. When it came to the permits, the Oregon Court of Appeals stated that the permit to purchase program and point of transfer background check reflect a contemporary legislation response to identifiable threats to public safety and a legislative determination that the risk of death or serious injury to members of the public is increased by the threat posed by untrained and dangerous persons obtaining firearms. Therefore, they upheld the permit process as constitutional. Now, on review of the magazine restrictions, they stated that we also observe that the magazine capacity restrictions is a contemporary legislative response to identified public safety concerns stemming from the advancements in technology and the availability of those advancements to the public that have created observable threats to the public's safety. So unfortunately, the Court of Appeals upheld the magazine ban and also the permit measures within this law. This is not surprising since it seemed clear after the oral arguments that they were leaning that way, that they were going to rule that way. However, I will say this case is far from over. The plaintiffs have now notified the court here, the Court of Appeals, and also the Supreme Court in Oregon, that they are going to seek review from the Oregon State Supreme Court. That has been, sought in the state of Oregon. Now, it's important to note that twice in this case, the state of Oregon tried to get the Oregon State Supreme Court to step in early on their behalf and block some TROs and some other orders that were issued by the lower court judge, Judge Robert Roschio. However, the Oregon State Supreme Court denied both of those requests. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to rule in our favor on review, but it does show that there is some sort of hesitation when it comes to this case in front of the Oregon State Supreme Court. The court is definitely kind of left-leaning. That's the makeup of the Oregon State Supreme Court, but it appears that there is some sort of hesitation in reviewing this case. Now, if they ultimately decide not to review this case, if they don't want to elevate it to their own review, after that, this can be taken to the United States Supreme Court. So there are options going forward. Some good things can, happen out of this. So again, this case is not dead in the water. It is just simply being elevated to the next level and really ultimately is getting one step closer to the ultimate review, which will be in front of the United States Supreme Court. So it's an unfortunate decision, but not all hopes are lost for those gun owners in Oregon. This is a case that we're going to be keeping our eyes on, and it is being elevated to the next level. So as we get more information, as this develops, I will let you guys know. Also hope everybody has a happy Easter, but don't forget the underlying reason that a lot of us celebrate this for. This is a big season for a lot of us, and it's very important because it means something so much more than all the other things that we do. All the big things that I do here on the channel really pale in comparison, to the underlying purpose of why we celebrate Easter. So I hope everybody has an amazing weekend. Hope you enjoy your time with your family, and hopefully you guys go out to church and kind of celebrate the true purpose of what we're doing here on this weekend. If you like this video and you'd like to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is to like, comment, and subscribe. All those things help to fuel the algorithm, and it signals to YouTube that you guys see value in these videos and in this type of 2A news. But as always, thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And never forget, this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.